manner.
Feel like I'm too close.
Too close to.
You.
No.
Well, I didn't mean to COVID. I want to be
Okay.
respectful.
No, I
Okay.
All right, let me call to order the Legislative Rules and Government Operations Committee.
I have
It's
extra.
March 22nd, 2022. It's 10:02 a.m. First item on the agenda for an action is approval of minutes of the prior meeting, which I believe was the March meeting. Was it March? Date. March 22nd. Is there any discussion or offering of amending of the minutes? All right, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes as presented. Supervisor Conover made the motion, seconded by Supervisor Driscoll. All those who favor minutes as presented, signify by saying aye.
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 Sorry.
Aye. Any nays? Okay, minutes are accepted. Next item, discussion items. Referral from May 5th. Personnel Administration Higher Education Committee meeting. Request for discussion regarding reimbursements to supervisors for non-education related expenses. So I was not privy to that discussion at the Personnel Administration Higher Education Committee meeting. Is there anybody here who's informed on that matter and that can share what the concerns are with us? All right, seeing none, I don't know what the issues are. Supervisor McDevitt.
Yeah, I know nothing about it myself. I guess I would just pose a couple of questions. Does anyone know, is there a problem with the current policy? I've never submitted an expense voucher, so I don't know. Or is there a suggestion that anyone is using the current policy inappropriately? So I just throw those two questions out there because I just don't know. I don't know what the point of the discussion is.
Either do I. Ms. Seaver, you had a hand up.
Thank you, Supervisor Straub. I was in attendance, and I'm sure our personnel chair can also add to it, but to be really brief on this, a while back, there was a request that came through for department heads. It was initiated by the sheriff, and we expanded it to all department heads for a $500 or less training opportunity that then wouldn't have to come through committee, and it could be fast tracked. So all of our department heads could attend those virtual trainings or trainings that cost under $500. That was the only change requested to the travel and training policy. But when it came back before us, there were multiple changes that were put into that policy that I did not hear the discussion happening at committee on. In fact, one of the changes went back to our old way where we were asking for a resolution. So in light of all of the requested changes that came up, yes, I think there are inconsistencies with the policy. I think it could be a better policy. But I'm unclear why all those changes are being made after we did so much work on it last year as well. I know I sent an email on asking for our clerk of the board to provide the feedback from last year. There seems to be some conflicting language as it relates to some of the proposed changes. It was my impression that the only thing we were going to do was just change the $500 policy so our employees could attend training in a much more efficient manner. And I think until we really get time to wrap our head around everything else, we should just leave this on the agenda as a pending item and continue to look at it and meet with the county attorney and the county clerk or the clerk of the board to make the suggestions and see if there's a need. I'm not convinced that it's urgent, but I do think the $500 item, and correct me if I'm wrong, Supervisor Thomas, but did that pass through personnel to just do the $500 change, or you guys held it?
No, unfortunately, that did not. That did not make it through the personnel. I'm not really sure why it didn't. Table it. So that's what we did.
just as a follow-up, if we could go back to the 2021 policy, the last time that we approved it, and just make the simple change of the $500 or less training and nothing else, that would be great to get that moving, so our department heads are not at any more of a disadvantage, and then really dive into this policy throughout the year. I don't think it's something that can be done in 30 days.
Can you read that part of the policy that pertains to the $500, please? And I don't have a copy of the policy and,
I
I think these are two separate issues though.
yeah,
If I could just try to clarify, the travel and educational policy is about travel and educational expenses. And the section that was heavily redrafted, my impression was it was to clarify the educational expenses and the approval process for the educational expenses. But it had nothing to do with it had educational related expenses, meaning travel, lodging, and food that was connected with educational expenses. But my understanding of the discussion item is this is a discussion about non-education related expenses on the agenda for today. So maybe I'm not clear on the agenda item for today. It's a request for discussion regarding reimbursements to supervisors for non-education related expenses. And in reviewing that, I thought that was relating to going to local events, going to, I don't want to name any particular events, but what's the policy that the board is going to supervise themselves under for expenses related to their activities outside of the boardroom, I guess would be the broadest way for me to say it. So for example, ARCC every year has a function. If a supervisor goes there, is that reimbursable or not reimbursable? I thought that was the focus of this item. And my impression from the personnel meeting, and I of course defer to the chair of the personnel committee and the members of that committee, was that there was a request to have more discussion about the modifications to the educational policy as it was presented to the board. But I think those might be two separate issues, but I'll stop at this point.
well, this is clear as mud. Amanda?
I have the personnel minutes here. I don't know if that will help.
Yeah,
So there are
please.
two separate issues going on here. So the personnel committee was discussing the proposed changes to the Warren County travel policy. And they elected to table that. And it says, until the next meeting to allow the county attorney to incorporate changes suggested by supervisors and provide a draft for the committee to review. So during that discussion, the personnel committee, there was a motion that was made, seconded, and carried by a majority vote to refer to legislative rules and governmental operations committee a request for discussion relating to whether it should be permissible for supervisors to submit for expenses related to attending banquets and similar types of events. So these are two separate issues. So the one that's before this committee is just regarding relating to banquets and similar types of events, not the travel.
Thank you, Amanda. Supervisor Conover.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened to command personnel. It was the item dealing with educational travel and educational expenses was tabled so that supervisors would be given just that they wanted to comment on it or make additional suggestions at the time to submit those suggestions to the county attorney so that they could be considered. And it was tabled at that time for that reason. The matter that's before us is, as Larry and Amanda pointed out, is a separate matter. It's a separate referral.
Yeah, it seems to me that the question before us today is becoming a little clearer after Amanda read that part from personnel, is that you have ARCC, you have EDC, you may have the Adirondack Park Agency, you may have the Lake George Park Commission, you may have the Lake George Association, you may have a multiple number of local organizations. that are doing great things. I mean, even the World Children's Museum. So it's voluntary if you attend those. And I guess the question is, if you attend those, and they might be related to county business or not, you could make the argument that they all are in some way or format. Should the supervisor who attends those be reimbursed for their costs? That's what I'm hearing. But in any event, was it Supervisor Driscoll that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. I'm not ready to take any particular position on this, but I just want to share a quick story. What brought me to this region 36 years ago was I was the director of a professional trade association of not-for-profits in the 6 New England states. And I had done a conference over at Killington, and then I did a conference down at Dunphy's Hyannis on Cape Cod. And a few New York not-for-profits attended those meetings, and we had tremendous workshops. We had members of Congress, business leaders, real VIPs. But a lot of the real business got attended to over breaking bread at a dinner where like we're sitting around this table. You get around the table and you start really talking about issues. What's working for you? What isn't working for you? And a lot of business got done, not at the workshops in the educational format, but right around the table at these banquets. So I'm a little, I find it ambiguous, to really come up with a real solid definition of what's educational and what's non-educational. I think, as the chairman said, it's really up to the interpretation of the particular individual. I don't think that there's any of my 19 colleagues who are looking to get a free pass or a free lunch off of the taxpayers. If you're attending a particular event and you think that I believe that if you think that it's related to your ability to do your county business that much better, you should have that option, just like we have the option of getting reimbursed for mileage, even though I've never had to, because obviously I live right down the street. But some of my colleagues from the North Country, they have that choice whether or not they want to submit a travel voucher. Whether they do that monthly or quarterly, I don't know. But that's their option to do that, and I think it's based on the relevance of their attendance at that particular event or activity. So thanks.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Seaver.
Thank you. I'm not sure why we're talking about any changes to the travel and education policy as it relates to elected section 203. And I would ask the clerk of the board to send this out to everyone. Under county officers law makes it very clear that expenses incurred in the performance of an official duty is to be reimbursed, and that the board of supervisors may authorize payment of a reasonable mileage allowance for traveled on official business. It goes on to state what county officers law allows. I guess it would be my opinion not to limit any of this. If someone's elected and they want to attend meetings and trainings or whatever, they're elected by their constituents. If they follow the proper policies, then it should be permitted.
Well, the question seems to me to be, what's the definition of official duty?
But identified by the
I
county
mean,
law.
for example, we're having an introduction to the public of Joseph Warren on June 7th. And they want me to present myself as Joseph Warren. All right, well, that is, Warren County Historical Society, but the county is involved in that too.
Mhm.
So the cost of my clothing and the expenses that I take to get there and so forth, that should all be reimbursed by the county.
That's not in the county officer state
Well,
law.
I'm just saying, what's the official duty?
Clothing doesn't appear.
It becomes gray area, it becomes very cloudy. I'm agreeing with Driscoll, but Supervisor
Oh,
Conover.
sorry, Rob.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this might be helpful to break this down. The word may is permissive, is not mandatory, it's permissive. And so it would seem to me the suggestion there is that the board may approve. In other words, that you can request that of the board. And some things lend themselves to submitting to the board for travel, right? That our meeting structures or whatever. And then there's the those things that perhaps may not lend themselves to that. They may be relatively minor, but, and then the question becomes, well, okay, so who's authorizing that? Who's authorizing that travel? So I'm willing to support any reasonable guidelines that might be developed in this regard. I think there should be. There are many ways to approach this. There could be a list of activities that's sanctioned, if you will, that's understood by the board as being eligible for people to go to, that we adopt. We could create another type of procedure where perhaps we could leave that discretion of a dollar amount less than a certain amount in the hands of some officer, the budget office. I don't know. I mean, I'm willing to consider any reasonable approach. I'm sure other counties have some guidelines. It might be productive and useful to take a look at what they have in this regard. But I could well understand where, you know, a supervisor, as I said, wants to attend a specific item. It's a relatively nominal fee. How does a supervisor go about getting authorization for reimbursement? I don't know that it's reasonable to expect that to go to the full board for action by the full board, but maybe some other type of approval process is satisfactory. So I'm willing to consider anything that's put out there.
All right, so summarize yours is, and tie it in with Supervisor Siebers, it's authorized official duties might be entitled to some kind of reimbursement. County Council?
And just to be clear, section 203 on actual and necessary expenses is addressing all officers and employees. So it's a county-wide dictate from county law. My general compass when it comes to the Board of Supervisors is county law provides the board the authority to govern themselves. So 203 does apply and is the basis for an employee incurring a cost as part of his official duties to get reimbursement for that cost. I think the topic this committee is discussing is not as clear as the standard employee reimbursable expenses. And what rules the board will apply to themselves to govern reimbursement of the types of expenses that maybe some supervisors apply for and some don't. So I just wanted to clarify on
Does the supervisor individually make that determination? I judge that to be eligible and I'm going to go. Or is there some other metric, some other process? I'd like to go to this thing. Is it something that should be signed off by the chairman of the board, the budget officer, whatever it might be? I mean, I think that's what I'm thinking, that there needs to be some rules to the road here. Not to restrict anyone, but just so that there's a process that is that's there, and I'm willing to consider anything that's reasonable and appropriate. And I think it's especially important that it not be too cumbersome. In other words, that wants to go somewhere, it should be a fairly kind of make a phone call, bang, and it's fairly automatic. But because it is related to county business, and I think that. I don't know that we should be designing it here today, but I think that there must be some examples out there.
I think, yeah, examples, guidelines. Well, and then you come to that gray area between what is the motive for attending a certain event? Is it for their political well-being of the individual? Or is it really you're attending because you're going to learn something more that you're going to bring back to the county board of supervisors, if it's a county supervisor? Of course, as pointed out by county council, it could be an employee. So I think you're onto something with the guidelines.
Be something there, but I think it needs to be user friendly, and it needs to also respect the fact that elected representatives are elected to represent their constituents as they see best how to represent them. I think that they're playing with it, whatever is in the guidelines, it should not have to be unreasonably withheld. There should be a check, I guess. But I think that,
Well, I think we're at the point where there appears to me to be a consensus or general agreement, but Supervisor McDevitt.
I just pose one question. Is it conceivable or possible that two supervisors would attend the same exact event? One supervisor would submit application for reimbursement and one would not. So I guess, yes.
the answer, I think the answer to that
Yep,
is,
okay.
you betcha.
Yep, okay.
That could happen, or neither,
Yeah.
or both, of
Okay.
course, but I think that the guidelines, some guideline would be there that,
Just leave it up to the supervisor, I guess, huh?
well, I think there needs to be a check and a balance, but the question is, what is that check and that balance, right? In other words, that there should be some, because, and then the question becomes, one of appropriate dollars have to be budgeted for these things, but I think it's a delicate area because, and I respect that, it is a delicate area, that people are elected to represent their constituents as best, use their own judgments on how to do that. And I think that needs to be respected. And then the question is, okay, how does that representative access county resources to do that? And I think that if we don't have any guidelines and it's silent, then that doesn't work for the supervisor or for the process, does it? Because that silence now is, well, who decides and how is it, how, I suppose somebody says, no, I'm not, I don't think that should be reimbursed. Somebody in accounting decides on their own that that's not a reimbursable expense or whatever. In other words, I don't think, like I say, I think there are probably plenty of examples out there, but I think that we should be sensitive to the fact that elected representatives are there to represent their constituents and to use their judgments. And when the constituents no longer feel they're doing that, well, then they have a way of deciding that your services are no longer required, right? But I think that, somebody wants to travel somewhere, they come in to hand in a reimbursement and somebody says, no, we're not going to reimburse that. Well, that's not right. At the same time, somebody's making a decision, well, I'm going to go to whatever and I'm going to submit for reimbursement with absolutely no check or balance on that. So there needs to be something.
Some guidelines, some kind of guidelines that give you guidance towards what might be authorized official duties and what might be other than authorized official duties that, you're welcome to attend, but at your own expense kind of thing. Supervisor Seaver.
Thank you for calling on me. Supervisor McDevitt, I wanted to answer your what if the whole, not in the detail that Supervisor Conover did, but last year Supervisor Strauss, Supervisor Wild, and myself all attended the ARCC event.
Okay.
I presented a proclamation on behalf of the county. I decided not to ask for any mileage, or the county did, however, pay the cost of me attending the event directly. Supervisor Wild put in for mileage and reimbursement for the event. Supervisor Stroud didn't do anything with the county. So you have an instance of 3 supervisors attending, representing our county, rightfully so, with 1 supervisor presenting a proclamation. And, we represented our county well, but 3 people chose to handle it 3 different ways. And I think county officers law provides us with that flexibility. But to Supervisor Conover's point, there are, yeah, and as you know from being chair, there are some checks and balances that are in place. So if a supervisor wants to attend a conference, the money's in the budget and it requires a travel authorization, you have to ask the chair of the board and they sign off on it. And that's it. So I think what we're looking at is if someone's attending meetings, the county, this is very clear on may do mileage, and this board has talked about whether or not that's a permitted expense in the past, but I don't think that's what's before us right now. I think it's in that gray area of meetings, luncheons, events, things like that, what falls under representing the county and what falls to socializing or, you know, other activities. And, you know, it looks like there's a whole lot more work and, you know, diving into this that has to go into it before we can make a decision. And I'd prefer to wait and make a good informed decision and look at other counties' policies.
I'd like to
Yeah.
see some.
Yeah, well, and me too. I think that there are certain costs that are associated with my job that I voluntarily ran for and got elected in, that those costs are out of my pocket. That's understood. Yeah, I have a sense of duty and feeling that I should attend, you know, as many Lake George Association events as possible, because I need to keep those and maintain those relationships, and they have to be strong. I want to respect their opinions as well as I want them to respect mine. So those social things work in that direction. I eat those costs because I think it's part of my duty as it's just part of my duty. But again, that's my opinion.
I would ask then, just to, for brevity, just to ask you as the chair to communicate with the county attorney and the county administrator. Do a little bit of homework, just come back with some material that might exist in this regard that we might find useful and give us a time-effective way of dealing with this.
Okay, so I think that's a
And
great
other
suggestion.
supervisors. All of us should be able to give feedback.
Yeah, well, let's start with a
Yeah.
draft and then we'll bring it back here and we'll all have feedback, okay? So can you talk to Administrator Ryan and see if between you and him or somebody in your office and Administrator Ryan, that you could kind of work out a list of what might be authorized official duties. Is that wording in the right direction? Okay.
So it might not be, we may not have to reinvent the wheel.
What I'll start with is looking at some local counties to see what they have, but I did want to remind the committee that the policy can be as open or to restrictive as every supervisor decides on their own, or no supervisor gets anything. I mean, I don't imagine the board wants to be on either of those two extremes, but those are both, I believe, permissible. The question is where between those two do you fall? And with 20 supervisors, that's a difficult place to land on, is the only observation I make. So I'm gonna just ask the committee if we can come back, not with a draft policy, but maybe like talking points and that the committee could work through before we put the time to create and write and draft a policy. Because there's something about drafting a policy that's, I think, appears to individuals as more concrete, where if we can talk through and get some consensus first, then we can form a policy around that consensus rather than the administrative staff just deciding where we should fall on it, which I want to avoid.
I was thinking more of the character of the activity that we want to encourage a county supervisor to attend, for example, because the character of that activity is going to enhance their job, I guess, as a county supervisor. Educational value would certainly be one of them. But again, that I think we're talking about a list of characteristics of the activity that this board could consider, this committee could consider as being valid or not. You know, just give us a draft of thoughts. Okay. Is that okay with the committee? All right, so we can move on. Next item. The committee to consider and discuss changes to the open meetings law. I have no idea what changes they're talking about. Does anybody?
Zoom.
It's really a rather limited, I'd sent out an county attorney opinion on the new statutory change to the open meetings law. And really, the 30-second executive summary for the committee is the open meetings law that existed before COVID was now put back in place and will be in place beginning in June. The difference is they've added a new statute that provides the ability for each municipality to make a determination on whether members can attend a meeting. And those are key words. Members meaning a member of the body. Attend means officially participate in the public body's meetings and deliberations while not being physically present. There was an overarching legislative intent in the reenactment of the
Up in Hague, isn't it?
Okay, I think we're good. There was a clear legislative intent to require or prefer physical presence of members of a board. But what the statute provides, once there's a quorum that's physically present, on a finding of exceptional circumstances or extraordinary circumstances, a member of that body may participate remotely. So we're not talking about the public viewing or participating. We're not even talking about county employees remotely viewing and or participating. It's really just a discussion about the members of the body when there's a physical quorum, under what particular circumstances will they be allowed to participate? And what's the process for approving that? The statute does a great job of not providing no clear definition of what extraordinary circumstances means, which basically means it's up to the governing body to determine. So one commentary I saw was that extraordinary circumstances could be the fact that the member couldn't get there, which does seem to kind of rub against the legislative intent in requiring physical presence, but that's a possibility. On the other extreme, a body or a board could decide that there will be no remote participation by a member who's not physically present. My feedback and what I'm hearing is that the overwhelming majority of municipalities are moving toward the permissive side, meaning if a member cannot be present, there is a process and a procedure that they're putting in place so that member can still participate and attend the meeting remotely. So that's different than how it's been handled up till now under the current rules, because all you had to do is show up on Zoom and you could be in. So really the conversation is two parts. First part, which is probably the more important part from my perspective, of assisting to create a policy, or rather actually a local law that would then be passed, because it needs to be by local law, would be what's extraordinary circumstances going to be? Is there going to be any restrictions and how much? Or is it going to be much more permissive and wide open as far as determining whether a member can participate remotely when there's a quorum that's established? Then the second part is going to be a little simpler. What's the procedure or process? And I can give a recommendation when we get to that part of what I'm seeing other jurisdictions doing.
Supervisor Conover.
Yeah, I think where I'm at this moment in time is that since probably an opinion significantly changed from maybe what it was initially, that I think it's important that we encourage attendance in the meeting like we do. I think that's important. That being said, I think that there are extenuating situations that can develop, sickness, COVID. You're isolated at home with COVID, or some other future situation. Perhaps you are under doctor's orders that to not travel for some reason, health reason, maternity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There could be a whole host of reasons. All, I think, very important, legitimate reasons why you can't physically be present. And I think that if we can develop local law that allows for that under those types of situations, to allow for the person to be at the meeting and vote, I think we should do that. I think that that's just making good use of the technology. And it's affording supervisors the opportunity to continue to do their sworn duty when they're not able to be here physically. And I think that we never had that before. And I think that that's a great opportunity.
All right, so in summary, you're willing to accept extraordinary, but I think we need to define that. I mean, you mentioned being sick. That would be an extraordinary situation where you're probably sick and you don't want to affect others, but you're not so sick that you can't participate in the process, but you would do so from Zoom. But the problem is wonder if you have a 7-person committee and 4 people do it Zoom. Now you don't have a quorum, in-person quorum.
Well, that's part of the friction that exists and why there's a strong preference in the new statute for physical presence, because it does require a physical quorum. And to clarify, I just wanted to, problem with the executive summaries is you don't get into details. This does not include state disaster emergency declarations, and it does not include a local state of emergency, meaning my understanding is you could flip back into complete remote attendance, and hopefully there won't be a need for executive orders in the future, because the statute actually provides, if there's a state of emergency in the state of New York or the county of Warren that's declared, that you can forego the open meetings law requirement and participate remotely. So I just want everyone to understand that these rules do not apply for another spike in COVID or whatever else comes down the road. Second, there's 3 limited examples of extraordinary circumstances in the statute that can apply if the county chooses, which is disability, illness, and caregiving responsibilities. But again, I do advise the committee that from what I'm hearing and reading in some of the group meetings I participated in with the Committee on Open Government, the preference is, and the recommendations are leaning more toward permissive rather than restrictive on extraordinary circumstances, meaning defining it large enough so it applies to more situations rather than highly limited. Because at the end of the day, participation in whatever form is preferred over not participating when you're an elected official.
So,
Person that's, the person that's participating remotely can or cannot be counted for the quorum.
They cannot be accounted for the quorum. They can vote and they can participate in executive session remotely. They can do everything as if they were physically sitting there. Once the procedure is followed to approve that extraordinary circumstance, which we can talk about.
That shouldn't be, that really begs the question, because under the old condition, if you couldn't be here, then you might not achieve the quorum. Anyway, you see what I'm saying? In other words, that you're basically allowing the participation in the voting, it just can't be counted for the quorum. But if you didn't allow that, the person wouldn't be here anyway because of these. So I'm not sure that that really applies. That is always a concern, is my point.
And one of the answers, the practical answers, is in the written procedures that the municipalities are developing is a pre-notice requirement. So it might be 72 hours before the meeting, 48 hours before the meeting. You know, it's not like, it's not really, you know, my diesel engine froze and I couldn't get there. It's more, I'm sick and it's 2 days before or 3 days before, or I have a business trip to California and I can't be there. You know, there's a whole host of, there's a whole universe of reasons, but there's some pre-notice so everybody knows who's expected to be there and who's not.
well, the advantage of the pre-notice is that, you know, let's say my diesel engine is not working. I could take the bicycle, I only am a mile away. But I don't know if there's a quorum or not. Is my attendance required to create a quorum? So how do you know? So the pre-notice would be appropriate. That way you're kind of helping to assure a quorum. Supervisor Driscoll.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it was yesterday that all of us should have received 15, 18 emails from Samantha Hogan regarding the committee meetings that start maybe today, but next week. And there's an area there that says, you know, confirm that you plan to attend or deny or whatever it is. You won't be attending. Usually what I've done is I've responded to the email. I plan to be there for the beginning and end of day one. I'll get back in touch with you as far as my availability because I don't serve on any of the committees on day number 2, or I'll be there for the first couple of hours and then probably not. I see that actually we've got 14 supervisors in the room this morning, 7 virtually. From this committee, 6 of the 7 committee members are here and present. Supervisor Fraser, and certainly I support her ability to have a vote if and when we vote on any particular matters this morning. I think that should go forward. Until it becomes a problem, until we start not having quorums, and I can only remember, I think it was one or 2 meetings in 5 years, and I think one of those meetings was because we had been here for 4 or 5 hours and people left, so we lost the quorum. Initially, we had those people, but until it becomes a real problem, I see, let's be as permissive as we can, but still be able to do business. So still have those people in the room, but those people who, for whatever reason, feel that they need to be Zoom, give them that opportunity. I don't think anyone's looking to abuse that. They may, I know that Supervisor Thomas in the past has had difficulty attending the annual evening meeting that we had because it conflicted with with his town meeting. If his town meeting starts at 7 and our county meeting starts at 6, it's very possible that he could spend 45, 50 minutes on the county meeting and basically be doing twice as much of his service to the county and to his town as he wouldn't have been able to do if he couldn't zoom in on that. So this is my feeling about that.
So from what
Chairman?
I support,
you support being more permissive.
being permissive, being more open until it becomes an issue or a problem. And then we can come back to the table and deliberate about that. But I don't see it as being a problem now that we need to come up to a solution because again, it hasn't been a problem, at least in my opinion.
Supervisor Seaver.
Thank you. Supervisor Stroh. I have 3 direct questions for the county attorney, if I may. County Attorney Elman, is this required to be a local law or a resolution? I've read both and I've heard both.
It has to be a local law.
So what is our time frame then for a local law? It has to be done by when?
Before, it doesn't have to be done at any time, but I believe starting June 9th, and I have to double check if it's the 8th or the 9th, but starting June 9th, the new open meetings law goes into effect, which would mean if there is not a local law, everyone must be physically present in order to attend. It does not mean supervisors for committee purposes or even for the board could not observe,
Sure.
but they would not be able to participate in their role as a member, which opens up a whole nother area of open meetings law
Mhm.
compliance, which I'm going to put a pin in for now, as far as addressing with the.
And to Supervisor Driscoll's question about, well, we can always go back in and update it till it becomes a problem. It sounds like if then we pass a local law, which it sounds this all came out of the board meeting last week. Supervisor Conover, actually, you suggested that it come to legislative rules to discuss. And then the goal was that we'd be coming back to our board meeting Friday with a proposal for the board to consider so we could do a public hearing and have the local law passed. But I wasn't sure, based on the conversations before in the emails, if it was a local law resolution. So it sounds like we won't be ready for this board meeting, but thankfully we have those 2 board meetings a month and can get something in, hopefully for the next one in time. But I have, as asked, all of us were asked to send in our comments. I've sent those to you. I like the idea of the extraordinary circumstances, but I do think that this board should consider a maximum use of that. Otherwise, I mean, I get being permissive, but that means all the time, anytime you can hit one of these reasons and not be physically present, especially if you need a physical quorum to trigger some of these other things.
If I could, I think that's going to fall, I was going to bring up that particular question
Yeah.
for some feedback and input. But that's more the procedure that the board will enact rather than the first question, just how do you want to define extraordinary circumstances? You know, you can define it kind of like the supervisor from Glens Falls has stated, which is almost the same way we've discussed the non-educational reimbursement, where you leave it more up to the discretion and call of the individual supervisors of whether it's extraordinary or not, or you can make it more restrictive and defined. On the procedure side, so that first step would be, that I see most often, is requiring that prior notification to the chair that they're going to be requesting to attend using extraordinary circumstances. And then the boards or committees or subcommittees are actually hearing that, voting on it, and approving it once the meeting starts. It's typically the procedure that's used. And the reason they're doing that, I suspect, is because they have quorum, physically present quorum, and then they make the decision at that time as the public body that's meeting, whether it is in fact extraordinary circumstances. I get the sense that once that starts occurring, it'll be regularly approved. That's kind of the process that I'm talking about. Point number 2. My professional and personal hope is that the Board of Supervisors enacts a policy for all public bodies within the county. Does not allow each committee to create their own set of rules, which is also permitted under the statute, but would be very difficult to.
Supervisor Conover.
Chairman,
The authorization states the reasons, the three criteria. All we need to do is basically have a local law where we adopt or we incorporate, we say yes to the state authorization, correct? And then it's up to each individual supervisor not to run afoul of what the criteria are for utilization of this tool. If you can recite the three provisions in the law.
There's really four, and
Four.
this whole conversation has focused on the fourth one. So the way the statute reads is including disability, illness, caregiving responsibilities, or any other significant or unexpected factor or event which precludes the member's physical attendance at such meeting, which is what we're asking. You can accept that, meaning that can become the local law, which would be the broadest possible interpretation that's permitted. Or it can be more defined as to what extraordinary circumstances means for Warren County.
I would propose that the legislation recite those four requirements with a notification provision, and that be the way we proceed on relative to the local law. That way we don't run afoul of or get into the weeds on stuff that take a lot of man hours. Authorization spells it out fairly clearly.
Well, so the other significant factor would be your diesel engine isn't running.
Chairman, may I chime in?
Read that. You can read the last criteria. Read it again.
Any other significant or unexpected factor or event due to the member's physical attendance at such meeting. And that's really determined by the body. Quorum. Process would be to approve that's an extraordinary circumstance.
We have to approve that at that very meeting.
I'll double check on that and see if there's been any more guidance. 2 weeks ago was the recommendation.
Chairman,
Approved. Right? The body could be the committee and or the board of supervisors.
Correct.
That would be the answer. That would, yes, but you could also say what maybe a better example might be. There might be. And so for all the
So the Zoom attendee would say, please excuse me. I don't think you guys got it down in Queensbury, but we got 6 inches up here in Horicon, and the elements plowed the roads, and I can't make it down. But then-
Chairman, if you
so that
may,
would-
may I
that
say
person would
something?
Be excluded?
If you had a notification.
Notification.
California for your daughter's wedding or your son's wedding or an event. In other words, I would think of an event like that where you could easily meet the notification requirement. But yeah, no, if your car didn't start, that you might want to call up another supervisor to pick you up. But
Well, Supervisor Seaver, did you?
I would like to, but I'd like to defer to other people that haven't been, their hands are up. I know it's hard to see, but if at the end I could, that would be great. Thanks. Is he
Is there
Claudia?
anybody on Zoom that would like to speak to this at this time?
That would be great, Chairman.
Are you trying to speak,
Yes,
Supervisor Bramer?
can you not, you guys must not be able to hear us in the room.
But I can't hear you.
I know the other people on Zoom can hear me. Okay, I will stop.
We're having some, if you can hear me, we're having some technical
Yeah, you can
issues
hear.
that we can't hear you,
Okay,
but Amanda's working on it.
Can you guys hear me?
Andrea's trying to talk too. Can't hear you either, Andrea. Okay. Cool. Okay, well, while we're waiting,
Yeah.
can I go back then?
Yeah.
So I think it's really important that the notification be to the clerk of the board. They are here all of the time. They are reliable. We're able to reach them by email, by phone, and in their absence, I guess it could always be the county attorney's office who can determine if it falls in one of those categories. But I still would like the idea of the maximum amount of use addressed. If it's the board's decision, they don't want to put a max on it. Okay, but I think that's worth seeing what other counties are doing. And also about executive session being in person, comments from the public in person. We don't have a Zoom account that we give out publicly. We live stream to YouTube. So I think it's really important that we have in this legislation that we're going to live stream to YouTube so that our public can see our meetings in real time and retain the YouTube videos. We do summary minutes. We refer back to the YouTube where you can hit a transcription free of charge and transcribe every single word in a video. It's a great service and it's one the clerks have been using quite a bit of across the state of New York. So those were other things that I think we should be addressing in the policy.
If I can just address those with the board, with the body voting to permit a member to participate and attend remotely comes a shift in the underlying rules regarding public participation. So in a meeting where no members are appearing remotely under the statute, the public is not required to be given an opportunity to make public comment remotely. I have noticed in the board and the committee meetings, there seems to be a question asked at the end of the meetings, whether there's any public comment. That's fine to do, but there's no statutory requirement to do that currently. And in a meeting where no members are participating remotely, there's no statutory requirement for members of the public who are not physically present to be permitted to participate remotely. That's different when a member participates remotely because of extraordinary circumstances. When that occurs, then any member of the public may participate remotely for public comment or for any discussions that are open to the public. So I just wanted to make that clear. And for executive session, statute does not provide any limitation. I'm not sure that the statute can limit a member's participation in executive session after the board approves that member's participation through Zoom, that member cannot participate in the executive session as a member of the board. So I don't know if I'm mishearing the supervisor from Queensbury, but once a member is allowed to participate remotely, they participate and attend in all of the proceedings to include executive session.
So just to be clear, participation means voting. Attending means they're observing, but they're not voting.
No, attending is the function you perform as a member of that body. You attend, and in attending, you fully participate.
So what is it when someone isn't there a happy medium where you can dial in, be part of it, but not be voting? so that you can stay up to date, say you can't make something, you don't meet the notice in time, couldn't we still afford the availability to supervisors to Zoom in, but not be able to vote if they don't meet the notification requirements?
This is a different question outside of the statute that we're
Okay.
talking about, and it
I
opens
don't
the
need to know
door
right now.
to what's currently occurring with supervisors who are not on a
Mm-hmm.
committee, appearing remotely and participating in the proceedings, not during public comment, but at any time that there's a discussion.
Can you guys hear me now?
That question's, I think, a little,
We put in the
You
pending
guys
item.
can't. They can.
So for now, as we, oh, I'm sorry, Supervisor Thomas.
Yeah, I think if you're gonna have any notice, it should be like an hour before the meeting. Because otherwise, how do you have an unexpected event? If you had to notify 2 or 3 days before that. How you do an unexpected event 2 or 3 days ahead of time. Oh,
Just thinking the same thing initially, I was thinking more in terms of certain kind of events, but then there's other types of events that are more immediate and maybe, and I don't see the harm is, I mean, the idea is just to afford our staff the opportunity to know that you're going to be zooming in, that
I would think an hour would
you're not going to be here. So I think that's, I mean, suppose you wake up in the morning and you do a home test and you got COVID. Well, now you got to quarantine for some period of time, right? Well, that's going to be, might not know that, but hours in front of the meeting. So I think you're absolutely right. Initially, I was thinking,
All right.
but now I'm not
And
so
that may be desire, but from what I'm understanding right now, the pre-notice requirement is not part of the state law.
correct. The board,
We can
the
adopt it.
county could say there's no notice, that you just show up on Zoom and then ask for permission.
So going forward, we have to follow the state law as it is. But I guess there's room for us to amend it if that's the will and the consensus of the Board of Supervisors. So this pre-notice requirement, Supervisor Thomas says 1 hour. That seems very practical, or longer. And maybe that's the standard that we adopt. But right now, we don't have that standard, but I think the board needs to consider certain standards. Now, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Like Supervisor Seaver said, what are the other counties doing? And in fact, what are the other towns doing? Because it's the one of the same. I'd like to kind of experiment and go out there and get in contact with Association of Counties and Association of Towns and see if they have any models that other municipalities are adopting that we could bring back to this table for consideration. So could the county administrator or the county council kind of review? It's a little early, so there's probably not much out there, but kind of keep an eye out for models that seem to be attractive. And so we don't have to reinvent the world. All right, so again, I don't know if we fixed our audio problems. Is there anybody on Zoom who would like to speak to this matter?
Can you guys hear me in the room?
Yeah. Loud?
Yes?
We
Yes?
could hear you in Warrensburg.
Oh, okay.
Loud.
Thank you. I wanted to comment that I am in support of the permissive ability of supervisors to attend remotely, and I definitely think we should pass this local law allowing us to continue to take advantage of the opportunity that we have with the technology here. Warren County has done a great job right away. I mean, everybody, I see Mike Colvin is there right now helping to fix technology issues. So I think it's certainly something we should continue. There's already language out there from other municipalities that we can borrow. One of the ones that I found that I think is really great does provide a definition for extraordinary circumstances. It says it's non-exhaustive, but shall include disability, illness, caregiving responsibilities, or other significant or unexpected factor or event which precludes the member's physical attendance at such meeting. And it does require pre-notice to the board's clerk, so Amanda's office, at least 24 hours prior to the meeting, or as soon as reasonably able. So something like a snowstorm that morning, you'd be able to send in your notice that you cannot make it physically attend, and that would be it. I do not agree with voting, having the committee vote on whether or not a person is able to attend virtually. They should provide their notice under the reasons listed, and that should be sufficient. I also don't agree with the number of times limit that someone is able to or not able to provide notice that they need to attend virtually. And I really hope that we can get a draft of this soon. I don't think it's rocket science here. There's other municipalities passing these things, and to get it out there, get a draft for the board to look at. I was hopeful that we would have had something for today, but I'm really glad that we had this policy discussion, and hopefully we can get some consensus around moving forward soon. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Chairman.
Just for the record, those 4 extraordinary notices are the state law, and we're all abiding by those. But anybody else on Zoom before I come back here? Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Mike Wild. I just want to just remind the board that recently we instituted 2 full board meetings a month. That has significantly changed, I believe, all of our calendars. Unfortunately, I probably, like many, have planned time off and vacations around those blocks of time that are now being utilized for another board meeting. So I hope we can be flexible in this, because my plans have been set 9 months ago, if not longer. And it would just be good to have that flexibility. I can do some remote, I can come in possibly for some of the others, but it is a unforeseen circumstance. And I'm just curious to see if we can incorporate something along those lines to allow these last minute meetings, to allow us the flexibility to come in remotely, if we can still do that.
Okay. Understood. Anybody else on Zoom? Edna, are you okay?
I'm okay.
Okay. Supervisor Driscoll.
Just a quick comment, Chairman. Yesterday I was on my way to Boston, but I understand that the Queensbury School District closed early. I'm not aware that some of the school districts in the North Country, North Warren, Bolton, Warrensburg, whether or not they closed or not. I think it's important that we recognize that just because one supervisor may choose to call in because of circumstances in their region or their area, that we need to compare them to the others. So again, whether or not the other school districts closed doesn't mean that they weren't being responsive and sensitive to the needs of their students and faculty. It just means that that was their choice.
Are you suggesting that we should add to extraordinary circumstances that there might be climate-related reasons for not being able to attend?
I don't think you need, I don't think, again, you need to
All right,
continue,
okay.
because you could make a Christmas wish of items there. I think keep it simple and then
So,
if necessary. But, my
seems-
point was that 2 different individuals may consider, a circumstance to be extenuating or not.
Okay,
So
well, let's,
give them the option of calling that.
all right. Any other committee members? All right, so yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, I
County
appreciate it.
Council.
Because there's a number of supervisors listening, I think it's important for me, and there was 2 comments about an expectation that there would have been a policy or a local law draft provided to this committee or for Friday. And I just want to make very clear how I define my role as county attorney and what it is not. And I'm trying very hard to defer to the decision makers, which is the committees and the boards, of what should be in a particular policy or local law or resolution, and not substitute or insert my professional or personal judgment in that. Today's conversation was incredibly helpful for me, because before this conversation, I had no idea what was in any supervisor's heads as to what direction they wanted to go under the statute. So, and in drafting a draft, you're making assumptions of what should be in that document. So I understand the urgency, the desire to move forward on this. I just want to make clear that I'm trying very very hard to be cognizant of what my role is. Really is not. Policy decision, policy that office can draft according to what I've heard today, that is close to everybody's intent. Hopefully, there'll be more discussion on the draft.
We can't hear the boardroom.
And then the second point, the second question I wanted to answer. The statute requires very clearly that a member who's participating remotely, and maybe this is perfect given the audio issues we're having, but they have to be heard, they have to be seen, and they have to be identified by the statute. So they have to be physically seen the entire meeting. They have to be able to be heard word for word the entire meeting. They have to be identified, which might be the easiest of those for us to ensure occurs. But I hope I didn't go too long. I just wanted to use the opportunity to clarify. And if supervisors collectively or individually disagree with how I've defined my role, please let me know. Because at the end of the day, I'm doing what I can to try to represent the entire board. Thank you.
And I think your approach is the appropriate one. Okay, so in summary, we're going to be following the state law in terms of who's going to be present, meeting the quorum, and meeting the extraordinary circumstances if you plan to do so remotely. Otherwise, you're expected to be in person. And so will the changes which the state allows us to make would include a pre-notice requirement and maybe some other. County Council will get some draft thoughts to us as we move forward. Okay. Is there anything else, the Zoom members, on this particular issue? Okay. Moving on. Regarding the referral from the Finance Committee concerning Town of Johnsburg tax map parcel number 133.8-1-27, Mosher's Garage, the first Assistant County Attorney indicated he had found one local law where the Environmental Protection and Abandoned Industrial Property Recreation Law was upheld in Sleepy Hollow, New York. But he would like to research this further because it involved a property similar to the Mosher's property and would provide an update at a future meeting. All right, and I think this is in reference to can we go after the owner of the property and recapture the costs of remediating that property, if I'm right?
And I apologize, I do not have an answer on that today.
Okay, thank you. And the next item is, was the consensus.
And if I could just follow up, I will get something out to the entire board,
Okay,
because I think that's if it's okay with the committee, I think it's a board-wide concern, and I'll put it out as informational as well before the next meeting comes.
I have a question.
Next item deals with the draft mission statement to the Board of Supervisors for feedback. Oh, Supervisor Hogan,
Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
I can't hear you.
Okay, I'm gonna type.
All right. Where'd Mike go? Supervisor Hogan, try talking again.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
All right. I was typing as fast as I could in the chat. Can we change the language on this discussion to take out the Mosher's Garage reference? Because I believe what we're looking to do is discuss all remediation projects going forward. But in the meantime, every time this shows up on an agenda, it puts a little heart attack in the people in my community thinking you guys are trying to, or that somehow something's going to go awry with the current remediation that is going on and we are all very excited about.
We are losing video or audio when you guys don't talk right into the mics.
Are you hearing the static that we're hearing here? Yeah, okay. Good, so if, be happy to name of the particular property.
The motion's needed for it. It's just.
Is that a consensus of the board to remove that referral to Mosher's property because it could be any property in which remediation is being done and we seek reimbursement? And that does appear to be the consensus of the committee. Okay. And it appears to be the consensus of the people not on Zoom. All right, so where were we? We were on the part that is the mission statement for the county. Are we comfortable with what has been circulated? Or do we need to be refreshed? Yes, Supervisor Seaver.
Thank you. I thought last time we were supposed to give feedback to the county administrator, which I did, and I think other members did, but I just wonder what is the proposal after the feedback?
I know, I would have liked to have, have a draft of what is the most recent version available for us, but it's not here. All right, so we'll move on and hopefully next month we'll get a copy of the most recent draft of the mission statement and this committee can review that. Oh, Administrator, County Administrator, please.
We're having a very, very difficult time hearing anything that's being said in the committee room. I can report back. The last time we discussed this in March, the committee requested that I forward a copy of the mission statement as it was to the full board to get further feedback, which I did on March 22nd. And I heard back from 3 supervisors. 2 of them said no changes. 1 preferred a previous draft of the mission statement. So if the committee would like, I could read both of those now.
What's the will of the committee? Are you all right with an audible? Yeah, try it. We'll see how
Yes. Okay. The draft as it stands now is Warren County government is dedicated to protecting and enhancing our residents' quality of life by providing excellent services in a cost-effective manner, guided by the principle that county funds belong to our residents and not to the county government. We work for our residents, and we strive to serve them with humility, respect, and professionalism at all times. We protect and enhance our natural resources so they will provide enjoyment and livelihoods for generations to come. And the only feedback contrary to that I received in March was, as I mentioned, one supervisor liked the prior draft better, and that prior draft said Warren County government is dedicated to protecting and enhancing our residents' quality of life by providing excellent services in a cost-effective manner, guided by the principle that county funds belong to our taxpayers and not to the county government. We work for our taxpayers, and we serve them with humility, respect, and professionalism at all times.
Shorter the better. I don't know if it's short enough. Committee, need more thought?
Can we email them both out and we can just vote on them and put it to the, I mean, it's a full board adoption anyway. Can we have it at the meeting on Friday? I
Yeah,
don't know.
can you re-email those out? Okay, he will. All right, so we won't deal with that today, but
I just,
yes.
for the sake of brevity, I mean, I think I would put a period after the word residents and say, and not to the county government, because you could say, and not to anyone else.
Well, and I think I made a suggestion, you could delete a whole sentence and not change the meaning of it. It was kind of repetitive. And in those mission statements, the shorter the better. But, okay.
See what I'm saying? In other words,
Yeah.
I don't understand that. I don't disagree with it, but I don't understand why it's in there.
Yeah, and I agree with you. So we'll get the 2 drafts and we'll go from there. We're not prepared. It doesn't appear to me to do anything more than that. So we'll get the 2 drafts and perhaps throw them on the agenda for the next Legislative Rules and Government Operations Committee. All right, like to get you all to lunch at a reasonable time. The next item is a kind of food for thought item. I know that there is the discussions out there, and it's come to me in a variety of directions. Is it time to create a FOIL officer, or I think perhaps even a better term would be a records officer, a records access officer? The big reason it's using up our county administrator's time and not allowing the county administrator to do county administration. That I think we should consider creating a records access officer, a separate entity. And, that office should be independent of political influences and, keep an open door to the Committee on Open Government, of course. In this regards to FOILs and or any other records that are being sought by others, including county supervisors, that we do need a filter system that's in accord with some rules to assure the independency of this position and to assure the openness and the transparency of our county government. But the big reason, I'll start again, is this job has been laid in the lap of the county administrator. I don't think it should be. And I think it should be separate. I'd rather see our county administrator doing the hundreds of other things that they should be doing, rather than being the records access officer or FOIL officer, whatever you want to call that individual. So I'm proposing that we consider, and it's just a thought thing for now, the discussion, hopefully this starts the discussion of having and creating a separate office. And again, I think it should be independent of political influences. And it should be a direct office that's open to the County on Open Government, Committee on Open Government at the state level. We want to be open, we want to be transparent, we want to be free from political influences, and we want to free up the job of administrating this county and not being a records access officer. All right, so I'm just throwing it out for food for thought. And do you have any immediate thoughts on the matter?
I have a question.
Yes, Supervisor Hogan.
I'm unclear, Supervisor Stroud, who you're suggesting be the FOIL officer.
Well, we haven't gotten that far.
Well, if the county administrator isn't, what was the term you used? Influenced by political,
Yeah, we could
I don't know
create,
who isn't then.
it could be somebody out of the legal office. It could be somebody that we outsource. I mean, so I'm throwing it out there for your ideas to come back.
I guess I'm more, maybe I'm just getting stuck on a small phrase, but the suggestion that the county administrator is not independent is one that I find somewhat objectionable.
Well, okay. Other thoughts? Yes, Supervisor Conover?
Yeah, I mean, the history on this was that we needed a gatekeeper. Initially, somebody thought, well, let's make it the clerk of the board. And the clerk of the board was not real keen on that idea for the obvious reasons, as busy as they are. And then it ended up falling to the county administrator. Ryan was young to the boat. You know, it's like that line you say, are there any volunteers? And somebody, you know, everybody takes one step back and there's one person standing there, and it happened to be the county administrator. But I think I think it's consuming way too much of his time. I would agree with that. I think that we do need to have an identified gatekeeper, somebody who's well-versed in the law as well as Ryan has become. And I think that separating it from the county administrator's office is and having an individual so designated is what we should do. I think you know, it's costing us dearly right now amongst our two most highest valued positions, our county administrator and our county attorney. So it's not like there's zero cost associated with this. They're using their time, an inordinate amount of their time in this role. And I think the idea of another person, perhaps, I mean, perhaps it could be even a part-time person in the county attorney's office as one idea, but I think I absolutely support that concept. And I think that's how it needs to be.
Okay, Supervisor Seaver.
Thank you. I know that in 2019, you guys adopted this board adopted a FOIL policy. I wasn't on the board at the time. Then you also hired Ryan Moore when I wasn't on the board. So I am unfamiliar with what prompted the change in the FOIL policy then, but I would like to have a job description of the county administrator emailed to all of us. If this isn't his job description, I think that's something that we should be taking a look at or modifying. But more importantly, I've heard the county attorney's office suggested, but they also are appeals. They work on appeals for FOIL as well. So I don't know how you separate that, but I like the idea of a lawyer. I think, you know, that might be money well spent if it's done in the way it's envisioned. But in addition to the supervisor from Bolton's comments about staff time, we have to remember we have an administrative staffer who spends most of her time working on FOIL. She is excellent at it. So I think if you're going to be changing these out of the county administrator's office, you need to think not just about a records access officer, but also administrative staff, because most of this is administrative and not in, it was last year that we finally went to electronic redaction. And prior to that, many of you recall how much time was spent taking a black magic marker and redacting and charging the public. So we have made efficiencies to this. What concerns me is the number of times that supervisors are told that they have to FOIL versus asking for information that would be relative to their job duties as elected officials. And I think that's a different discussion and perhaps one that can be addressed at a later time. But there is that issue of who handles the appeals versus who's the record access officer. But I think it does need to be someone that the public feels is responsive, independent. And, you know, in the past, I've heard employees even say to me that they were really uncomfortable that someone would have a portal that you can just type anything into and all the emails come up. I've had supervisors say they're uncomfortable about that, but ultimately it's the taxpayer that pays all these bills. They're entitled to see documents. We need to be mindful of that. And what is that process? And how does that differ when we're looking for information in part of our official job duties versus ones that are outside of it? But I think there's a lot of moving parts here, but to just say, oh, hire someone else and we'll take care of the problem, I don't think that's going to happen. But I defer back to the chair.
If I may.
Move any first round? McDevitt?
Does Ryan have any observations as it relates to this issue? Ryan, do you have any observations as it relates to this issue?
I do. I think that the county attorney and I have had a chance to sit down and speak with each other about what we would recommend if the board does want to go down this road. And we think that it would probably make the most sense to have a per diem employee, because there are times when the volume of FOIL related work is very, very heavy. And there are times when it's very, very light. So to have somebody certainly full-time, we don't think is warranted. Part-time with a regular schedule, we think it would be better done as a per diem employee. We've discussed where that position might reside. And we do think that it is probably in the county's best interest to have the county attorney take a more formal role in the appeals process. Perhaps even have the county attorney be the appeals officer. And if we do that, it would make the most sense to have a per diem records access officer outside of the county attorney's office, so there's not a potential conflict there. And we've discussed perhaps putting it in the IT department, because most of our FOILs that come through my office are for email records, and the IT department is retrieving those records anyway and sending them on to us for a redaction review. We also discussed there are several departments where it may make sense to keep the records access duties within those departments, not have it go to this per diem. And we're talking the Board of Elections, Building Code Enforcement, the District Attorney, and the Sheriff. In practice, those four departments are much more hands-on in terms of helping us with the record retrieval, whether it's because the records are more sensitive, whether it's because it's just more expedient to have those departments handling the request in the first instance. So those are some of the ideas that Larry and I had. And if we do go down this road and the board likes those ideas, we could certainly put them into a red line of the policy and take a look at it.
Thank you, Ryan.
Okay, thank you. Any other committee members? Because there is a non-committee person that wants to speak, Supervisor Conover.
Yeah, I think it was at the last committee meeting, I had asked the way on this subject for our county administrator and our county attorney to get together to discuss this and to come back to us with some ideas, which is what Ryan has done. And I thank both of you for taking the time to meet on the subject and to come back with some of your suggestions. I think the per diem idea is an interesting idea as well. I hadn't considered that, but that's a very interesting idea where we could have someone when we need them, and when we don't need them, we don't need them, or her. So I'm thankful that you did that, and I'd like to see this move forward. I think it's important that this move forward and that we get this done. I mean, if I've heard it once, I've heard it more than once, that, you know, county administrators say, you know, the way this is going, this is all that I'm doing. And it's consuming an enormous amount of my time, not in a complaint way necessarily, but just as a matter of fact. I've also heard much from the county attorney in this regard as well. So I think it's timely. What is the best path forward? I mean, we can all discuss that. So some people may like the per diem idea, some may not. But it has my support to move forward to try to extract this from the county administrator's role and put this somewhere else.
Okay. Any other thoughts from committee members before I go to non-committee members? Okay, Claudia, you have a thought you'd like to share with us? Supervisor Raymer?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, just as way of background, this was changed, and I was part of the change in the way that we had done FOILs previously, which were to have the department heads basically respond to individual FOIL requests. And at the time, we did want to have some sort of clearinghouse. I would just as soon see us go back to having department heads handle the FOIL requests and put the information, you know, to Christie as to whether or not they responded and when they did so that we still have a clearinghouse, but to put more of that burden on the department heads and spread it out so it's not in one particular department or all falling on our county administrator's office. I understand that it is a large burden. On the other hand, it is our responsibility to respond to the public and make sure that they have public documents. The other thing I want to respond to is the implication that is being put out there that supervisors need to continue foiling for documents. I am strongly opposed to that concept. We are supervisors. As you all know, I have been advocating for us to change to a board of legislature. Until we do so, we are still supervisors. We are still directly responsible for managing this county, and we should still have access to every county document that we need in order to fulfill our duties and responsibilities as supervisors. Thank you, Chairman, for the opportunity.
All right, thank you. Anybody else on Zoom wish to speak to this concept of creating a records access officer and some rules and a filtering system and some independency of that position? I think there is some support among the committee to move in that direction. That's what I sense.
Chairman, can I,
Yes.
if I could just clarify one procedural point. And part of the reason, as the Administrator Moore mentioned, is for the county attorney to be the appeals officer, is because in practice, it's the county attorney's office that's researching, writing, reviewing, and preparing the appeal currently for the chair of the Board of Supervisors. And if the county attorney is the appeals officer, the next step in the process is the potential lawsuit under Article 78, which the county attorney is going to defend. But in that, there's a very strict timeline on reviewing and responding on the appeal, which is 10 days. When the initial request comes in, there is an ability for the agency to extend the time if the request is the type that requires substantial collection and time to put together, and there's a number of other, or a large number of other FOIL requests that are pending. So part of the conversation the administrator and I had was there's certainly a couple of departments that carry the weight in putting together their FOIL responses before they provide it to the county administrator, which are the 5 that were identified. The concern with pushing it down to every single department that's in the county is, one, there's a large number of them. And there's a concern that if their initial disclosure is not satisfactory, that 10 days may not be enough time for the appeals officer to obtain what's needed, the documents, review it, and then correct it if it wasn't complete. Whereas if there is one individual who's not the county administrator, who's working as a record access officer, the hope would be, and the expectation would certainly be, that the initial response from the county is legally sufficient and provides everything that's required to be provided. And the appeal process is in that 10 days is much easier, less onerous, and the county's less at risk at missing something and being subject to an Article 78 proceeding. It's that real first step, that initial response, that's so crucial in making sure we get it right, number one, but also we get it done timely. And there was a period of time where responding was taking longer and longer because there was more and more of a backlog of requests under FOIL. Again, whatever the board decides and the committee decides, but a per diem position does provide some ability to flex when it gets hectic with requests, and to not be present and not be paying that individual when there's a minimal amount of work to be done. Thank you.
All right, so the only intent of this was to bring it to the table for discussion. It certainly needs a lot more discussion and focus. So, but I wanted to introduce the concept. I think there is support for going in this direction and some good reasons for doing so. So if you'll just put it on your back burners, and we'll, I'll try and get a better outline of where we might want to go after other discussions with folks. And Supervisor Seaver, you want to add something?
I do. I just want to be clear that I'm not in favor of just one option. I hope that when you do bring it back, we will hear more about why there's a suggestion to go back to department heads, what worked and what didn't with that before, the per diem versus a full-time, and also the current structure and how that could be improved. I think this is a big decision, as everyone has said. It's taking up a lot of time, but the support staff consideration as well. So hopefully we'll hear a little bit more about those
We
options.
can certainly look at all those options
Thank
and
you.
then see if we can come to a consensus as to what we think is the best way to go. But we certainly need to look at all those options. I agree.
Thank you.
Chairman, I apologize to everybody. I just wanted to highlight what the supervisor from Glens Falls asked and the comment she made about supervisors' ability to access county records. And I would ask the committee to consider adding that as a pending item or discussion item for the next board meeting, because much like unreimbursed or reimbursable expenses and some of the other discussions we've had today, it's not a legal question that I can provide as county attorney a response to, because the right of any individual supervisor to have access to records is as great or as limited as the board determines that right to be. So I would hope that maybe this committee could start having a conversation on that, so there can be some clarity, because there are supervisors who are seeking documents who are, I'm not going to say being required, but the FOIL process is being used because there is no clear guidance from the board how to govern that request or item.
Well, okay, well, let's work on that one too. They're almost related. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Yeah, Supervisor Thomas.
Yes, at the May 5th Budget Committee, there was a referral to this committee to the CPL 730 expenses. At this time, the county is, let's see if I can find the number here. Expenses approximately $138,000 for these competency, not only testing, but try to improve the person's competency, stand trial. And we've budgeted anywhere from 20 to 40,000 a year in most years. But this year there seems to be, and it's going to get quite expensive. In the past, the state of New York used to pay 50% of these expenses, but they withdrew their 50% a few years ago. So this is what I'm requesting, and the committee was requesting, is that we come up with a resolution to send the state of New York to ask them to, at a minimum, reinstate the 50%, and the preferred amount would be 75%.
Like a resolution of support actually goes to.
Just put the 50 back in.
Is there another municipality that has a model? What's the timeliness of this? If there's a consensus in the committee to, I think we
Right.
need something
Let me
to
be
draft.
right. I guess my concern is that with what's going on Albany, I don't know why it didn't make the list here from the referral from the other committee, but I do think what Supervisor Thomas provided is enough to move forward with drafting a resolution to put forward to the full board. Maybe not at this Friday meeting, but the following one. Otherwise, we're going to wait a whole
Yeah,
committee cycle.
Well, he said there wasn't a timely nature to this.
Oh.
So if we had a draft to review,
Don't they go out of session?
A little bit better back.
I'm not real clear on.
Yeah.
In terms of the timeliness, why don't we just authorize the chairman of the committee to send a letter
Right.
to our state representatives recommending that that they return to 50% reimbursement on their program, and it's just.
I think Frank said 75%.
That's fine. You want to change your reimbursement, but I think it's.
Yeah, but don't you want to see the draft of the letter before I sign it?
I'm sure you
You're
wrote the
okay
letter.
with that?
I'm sure you can send out a draft form for
All right.
comment.
Would you send it to us after you send it so we can all have a copy?
Well, certainly, if council willing to draft something.
Doesn't matter if it's a letter, resolution, whatever the committee would like. If you want to proceed, I have enough to put it together and I can copy something.
So do we need to make that an action item? Because, all right, so is there a motion to allow the chairman of the Legislative Rules and Government Operations Committee to sign a letter that speaks to a CPL expenses that we would support 75% reimbursement for those CPL expenses. After I sign it, I put it in Supervisor Shepherd's request. I'll send you a copy of what I said. So there a motion to support that. Motion made by Supervisor Conover, seconded by Supervisor Thomas. All those in favor of that signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? Any further discussion? All right. Yeah. She's not on the committee. But Supervisor Bramer, any closing thoughts before we adjourn?
I do have one if you're at privilege of the floor, but I know Supervisor Frazier had her hand up during that last discussion, which we couldn't really hear.
Right, that's why my hand was up, because I really didn't have a clue on what was being said in the room. Thank you, Claudia.
Supervisor Thomas, would you, you're more familiar with this, would you kind of summarize for us, please? What?
I'd be glad to. At our budget committee on May 5th, there was a resolution before us to authorize some more expense on the court ordered CPL 730 expenses for the mental health and Office of Community Services. This is a court ordered competency therapy and tests by defendants to help them get competent so they can stand trial. And our current expense on that is $138,000, and we authorized $300,000 to cover the expenses for the year. Usually we only budget between 20 and 40,000. This year we budget 40, and most years we don't have an issue, but this year we do. And the request was to have a resolution, or in this case, a letter from the chairman of this committee to our state representatives to reinstate the 50% that New York State used to pay, or in my opinion, increase it to 75%, as it is their rules and their program. They should pay for it. So that's what it's about.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. Anything else for the good of the order?
Chairman, if I may, if you're at privilege of the floor. Oops, sorry.
Supervisor Thomas, you have something else?
Yes, I do. This is, I have several resolutions. One's by the Adirondack Park Local Government Review Board. I have one from Clinton County. I have one from Essex County. And these all pertain to the Senate Bill 1145, which is the Conservation Subdivision Design Bill. And they're in opposition to this legislation. This has been going around for several years. At one time, all these people, or a lot of these people, were in favor of it, and now they're opposed to it.
I'm not clear on what it is.
Well, the Conservation Subdivision Design Bill.
Did you want us to take action on it today, or you want to share that with us through emails? And
Yeah, I think I'll just send out the resolution.
all right, if you would do that.
Really need to read the legislation, and it's
And to see if we support it or not.
basically it's more regulation on private property. Subdivision, they want to impose new regulations, more environmental testing, concentrating everything into one area, that type of thing. Right now, the state, either in fee or in conservation easements, probably owns 60% of the Adirondack Park. And then if you take out what's already developed and what can't be developed, if it's wetlands or steep slopes or whatever the case may be, roads, there's really not that much land left to regulate. And for some reason, the legislature seems to regulate it more. But I'll send them out.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Supervisor Thomas. Supervisor Bramer,
Yes, thank you very much. Just one last item, from me, that I'd like the board to, or the committee to consider, not necessarily today, but I would like you to consider putting it on your agenda, as whether or not the county should recognize the holiday of Juneteenth. As you know, Chairman, it's a very important date in our history as far as freedom of people who had been enslaved in the United States. And I think that the county should consider making that a holiday. I did pass along to you a draft resolution that I think we could easily take some of that language and make it applicable to Warren County. So I'd really like the committee to take up that at a future meeting. Thank you.
All right, and two things, so there's recognition of June 13th. And then there's making it an official calendar, a county holiday where everyone gets it off and paid for. What are you thinking? Just a recognition of it, or make it an official county holiday and everyone gets paid and everyone gets it off?
I think we should make it an official paid holiday, but I'd be happy if the committee took up debate on either of those options.
Okay, we can put it on the agenda. Okay, we will. Anything else? In county, out of county? I see nothing. Motion to adjourn. Motion made by Supervisor Conover, seconded by Supervisor McDevitt. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of adjourning, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? We're adjourned.